I still remember that morning so vividly. It was the first Monday of June, and the sky over Denver hung heavy with strange, unmoving clouds. No rain, just a thick sheet of steel colored haze that swallowed the light. I stood by the glass wall on the 32nd floor of Hawthorne Dynamics, staring down at the line of cars below, wondering if the last 6 years of my life had truly been worth it. 6 years devoted entirely to Aurora, the energy storage project I had built almost from nothing. 6 years with no vacations, no weekends, and no full dinners with my father, the man who always asked over the phone, "Are you doing okay, Rachel?" I always said, "I'm fine, just a little tired." I straightened my jacket, took a deep breath, and stepped into the conference room. The cold, white light reflected off the long wooden table where 8 people sat waiting, including Ethan Cole, the newly appointed Chief Technology Officer, brought in just 2 months ago. He came from Voltatech, our direct competitor. Rumor had it he was hired to modernize the leadership culture. I didn't think much of it, not until I heard his first words that morning. Let's begin with the promotion proposal for Rachel Pierce. I presented my report slowly, carefully. Charts, metrics, and Aurora's stability ratios filled the screen. I talked about how we had reduced energy loss by 18%, secured a new contract with Northgrid Energy, and hit quarterly targets 2 weeks ahead of schedule. When I finished, the room was so quiet I could hear the air conditioner hum. Linda Hawkins, our CEO, gave a small approving nod. For a moment, hope flickered. But Ethan still hadn't spoken. He leaned back in his chair, fingers clasped, eyes fixed on the first page of my report. "Ms. Pierce," he began, his tone calm but heavy, "you're exceptionally skilled. I don't deny that. But moving up to head of engineering requires leadership, not just expertise." He flipped a page, met my eyes, and said, "You're great with details, but you lack strategic vision. I need someone who can lead, not just execute." My chest tightened. 6 years of relentless work reduced to a single, effortless judgment. Linda opened her mouth to speak, but Ethan continued, "I recommend we defer this promotion. Maybe in another year, when she's more prepared." The words fell like a cold stone onto the table. I glanced down at the paper in front of me, where my name sat beside recommendation, deferred. Linda's pen clicked against the table and the meeting moved on. No one mentioned me again. When it ended, people began filing out. Ethan walked over, placed a hand on my shoulder, and said quietly, "Don't be discouraged. This isn't rejection, it's just not the right time." I gave a polite smile, thanked him, and left the room. The hallway stretched long and sterile, lights gleaming on the polished tiles like reflections in a dream. I stopped by the window, looking toward the Low-Dew district, where my father's old machine shop once stood before he retired. He used to tell me, "When a system is wrong, you don't need to shout. Just let it prove itself." I hadn't understood what he meant back then, but that morning, I did. In the elevator, I ran into Ben Alvarez, my closest colleague. He studied my face and asked, "They turned it down, didn't they?" I nodded. Ethan said, "I'm not ready." Ben gripped the strap of his bag, his jaw tightening. "He doesn't realize Aurora would have collapsed years ago without you." I smiled faintly but said nothing. Some truths don't need defending, they just need time. That afternoon, I drove home across Colfax Bridge. The wind was dry and sharp, the buildings reflecting copper light from the setting sun. I turned off the radio, letting silence fill the car. Ethan's words replayed in my mind. "I need someone with vision." I thought about the sleepless nights writing technical documentation, the weekends spent saving corrupted data before clients could notice, the reports he signed without ever reading. If that wasn't vision, I didn't know what was. When I got home, the scent of warm wood and old machine oil greeted me. My father sat at the table, disassembling a vintage clock. He looked up, and one glance was enough. "Didn't get it, huh?" I shook my head. He smiled, setting down his screwdriver. "You know, there are two kinds of people in a system, the operators and the keepers of rhythm. Operators make it run, but the keepers make it alive. You're the second kind." I sat beside him, silent for a long time. Then I asked, "What if the system doesn't know it's broken?" He met my eyes. Then you let it prove itself. That night, I opened my laptop. Lines of green code shimmered against the black screen. Aurora, my creation. I reviewed the modules, the hidden scripts, and the buried documentation only I understood. No one at the company had ever asked how it truly worked. They just assumed it always would. And in that moment, I realized silence wasn't weakness. It was another kind of power, the kind that comes from absolute understanding. I closed the laptop and looked out at the city lights flickering beneath the gray sky. I knew I wouldn't quit. I wouldn't argue. I'd do exactly what my father taught me. I'd let the system prove itself, and when it did, no one would ever say I wasn't ready again. If you've listened this far, I'd love to know, where in the world are you right now? Drop a comment below, just a single line. Denver, New York, or somewhere far away under a sky just as gray as mine was that morning. And if you love stories where justice is delivered through intelligence, not noise, hit subscribe so you won't miss the next one. Because sometimes the most terrifying sound isn't a scream, it's the silence that knows exactly what it's doing. I came back to the office the next morning at exactly 8 o'clock. Not earlier, not later. My workspace was on the 29th floor, right between the engineering wing and the data center. The air always smelled faintly of metal and burnt plastic, with the steady hum of cooling fans filling the background. This place used to be my world, the place I had lived in for 6 years and believed I belonged to forever. Ben Alvarez was waiting by the door, a coffee cup in hand. He looked like he wanted to say something, but only nodded slightly. We both knew that from this day forward, things would no longer be the same. I turned on my computer and opened the Aurora system. The black screen flickered to life with streams of green code scrolling endlessly, data moving in patterns no one else in this company truly understood. Every module, every variable, every API pathway was built from hundreds of sleepless nights. I wasn't great at small talk, not good at leaving an impression in meetings, but I understood Aurora's every breath. I remembered the first day I took over the project. Back then, Aurora was just a scattered idea, an AI driven energy storage platform designed to optimize power distribution across regions. When it landed on my desk, it was chaos. No documentation, no system structure, no data model to follow. I spent 3 straight months at the office, eating cold sandwiches for dinner, rewriting every single line of code, rebuilding every simulation from scratch. Ethan was still at Voltatech then, though I knew his reputation, the kind of leader who excelled at presentations, persuasion, and taking credit. I never hated him, at least not before yesterday. Now, when I think about it, I only see a man afraid of people who know more than he does. The morning passed quietly, filled with the sounds of keyboards and printers. But inside me, something was shifting. I began to change my habits. Before, I'd always arrive early to scan the system and fix issues before anyone noticed. Today, I didn't. I let Aurora run on its automated cycle, the way I had programmed it. If something went wrong, someone else would have to find it, not me. When the support team sent a data confirmation request, I didn't respond. I left the message in my inbox for 15 minutes, then 30, then an hour. No one complained, they just looked confused. I could tell by the way they started messaging each other in the internal chat, waiting for a signal they'd grown too used to depending on. At lunch, Ben sat across from me, quietly opening his lunchbox. He looked at me and whispered, "You're really going silent, aren't you?" I didn't look up. Silence is the only way they'll realize who's been keeping this system alive. Ben sighed. Ethan's not stupid. He'll try to take control back. I smiled. I know, and I want to see how he plans to do that. That afternoon, Ethan called an unscheduled meeting. He announced that the development team would implement several algorithm changes to the storage module. I listened and immediately saw the danger in his directives. The numbers sounded fine on paper, but in practice, they'd unbalance the data flow within days. I thought about speaking up, then stopped myself. I took notes calmly and said, "I'll monitor the deployment process." Ethan smiled, satisfied, thinking I had fallen in line. To him, I was just another engineer, obedient, harmless. That was exactly what I wanted. When the meeting ended, Ben looked at me in disbelief. "You're really letting them modify the system?" I nodded. "Don't worry, Aurora won't collapse that easily. I built it to survive human ignorance. He didn't answer, but I heard my own breathing, steady, slow, and heavy, like carrying a secret too large to share. That night, I stayed late. The hallway was dim, fluorescent lights reflecting off the glass walls. The lab was empty, filled only with the constant rhythm of the servers. I sat down, opened Aurora, and checked the safety parameters. I wasn't sabotaging anything. I was simply removing the shield. The system would keep running, but if anyone touched its core without understanding it, it would respond in its own way. Before shutting down, I opened an old note file where I'd once written, "If anyone ever tries to take Aurora, they'll have to understand it the way I understand myself." I added one more line, "And if they don't, the system will speak for me." As I left the building, the night wind rushed through the empty hallway. I pulled my coat tighter and looked out at the city glowing below. Ethan probably thought power was measured by how loud you could speak in a boardroom, but I knew real power lived in the unseen lines of code. And sometimes, to be heard, you only have to stay silent long enough for the system to tell its own story. 2 days later, I arrived at the office as usual, exactly 8 in the morning. No one paid attention to me until the red warning lights started flashing on the main monitor in the engineering bay. One of the on duty engineers shouted, his voice breaking with panic, "Aurora isn't responding." The data link to Northgrid just went down. The entire room exploded into chaos. People who usually worked silently with their heads down now stumbled over commands like they had lost gravity itself. I stood there watching the graphs collapse across the big screen. Ethan appeared minutes later, the glass door slamming shut behind him. His jacket was open, tie loosened, eyes sharp with tension. "Who's in charge of monitoring the storage module?" he demanded, scanning the room. No one answered. I rose slowly. "I built that structure. What's happening?" Ethan turned toward me, his stare like a blade. "You're asking me?" "Aurora is your responsibility. The whole system's frozen, and clients are threatening to sue." I met his eyes, steady. "You ordered the team to adjust the distribution algorithm last week, didn't you? I warned you that it would destabilize the data balance." Ethan stepped closer, his voice lower but trembling with anger. "You're blaming me? I told you to deploy and you agreed." I exhaled slowly. "I agreed to monitor, not to approve. You signed that directive." The people around us exchanged uncertain glances. No one spoke. Ethan drew in a long breath, trying to compose himself, then barked, "You have 24 hours to restore the system. If not, don't come back." I looked straight at him. "I can do it. But I need full technical authority. No approvals, no interference. Aurora will only recover if I handle it myself." Ethan let out a short, cold laugh. "You're joking. I'm not giving a single engineer control over our core infrastructure." "You don't have another option," I said quietly, "because I'm the only one who actually understands how Aurora works." Silence fell. The hum of the servers was the only sound left in the room. An hour later, CEO Linda Hawkins arrived. She walked through the tense crowd of engineers with her hair neatly tied back and her sharp gray eyes taking in everything. "What's going on here?" she asked. Ethan stepped forward. "Major system failure. Aurora's entire storage network is down. I'm instructing the team to restore it." Linda turned to me. "Rachel, what's your assessment?" I spoke plainly. "I can bring it back, but I need full technical control for 48 hours. Otherwise, we're just patching the surface." Linda was silent for a long moment. Then she looked at Ethan. "Can you guarantee system stability without giving Rachel control?" Ethan didn't answer. Linda turned back to me and nodded once. "You have 48 hours. I'll take responsibility with the board. Get started." Ethan's jaw clenched, but Linda had already walked out. He stood frozen for a few seconds, then muttered, "Fine. You just bet. Your entire career." I started immediately. Ben sat beside me, monitoring the data logs. Streams of code raced down the screens, the green light reflecting in our eyes. Neither of us spoke for hours. I opened each module, traced the structures, and hunted for the break in the sequence. Aurora was alive. It responded to every adjustment, every pulse of information. My heartbeat began to sync with the rhythm of the code. Around midnight, Ben broke the silence. "Aren't you afraid? Ethan will blame you for everything if this goes wrong." I looked up at the flickering light on the wall. I've lived in someone else's shadow long enough. If this is the moment the system speaks for me, it's worth it. 46 hours later, Aurora began to breathe again. The graphs leveled, the data flow steadied, and the auxiliary servers came back online. Clients confirmed full reconnection. Linda walked in just as we sent the final report. She stood silently before the display, then said softly, "Well done, Rachel." Ethan stood behind her, his face blank, hands clenched. Linda turned toward him. "From now on, Rachel will oversee all Aurora technical operations. We need someone who understands the system, not someone who only talks about it." I looked at Ethan, not triumphant, not satisfied, just strangely empty. He turned away without a word. When I powered down my station, Ben gave a small smile. "You just saved the company." "No," I said quietly. "I just let the system prove who's been keeping it alive." That night, I drove home in silence. The streets glistened under yellow streetlights, wet from the evening drizzle. I thought about Ethan, about Linda, about Aurora. I'd won a small round, but the game was far from over. In this world, people only value you when they need you. And I knew, the day they forgot again, I'd make sure they remembered. The next morning, the air inside Hawthorne Dynamics felt heavy, as if a storm had passed through the night before. Quick footsteps echoed down the hallways. Clusters of engineers whispered in low voices. Aurora had been restored, but everyone knew the company had just skirted a collapse that could have erased hundreds of millions of dollars. I walked through a maze of sidelong glances, some grateful, others wary. In this world, people never know whether to admire or fear a woman who just saved the system they depend on. An email from Linda went out at 8 a.m., subject line short and sharp: Emergency meeting. Technical structure review. I arrived 5 minutes early on the 33rd floor. The glass door was already open. Linda was speaking quietly with the CFO, while Ethan sat on the opposite end of the table, silent, eyes fixed on his laptop as if no one else existed. I took my seat, set the folder down, and opened my computer. For a moment, the only sounds were the projector's hum and a pen tapping lightly against the table. Linda spoke first. "I want a clear summary from both sides. Ethan, you start." Ethan straightened his tie, lifted his head. "The incident resulted from a data balance error in the storage model. My team modified the algorithm to improve efficiency, but some processes might not have been fully verified." He glanced at me briefly, then added, "I asked Rachel to review the technical side before deployment, but perhaps the oversight process wasn't followed closely enough." Linda turned to me. "Rachel, do you have anything to add?" I nodded, opened my document, and projected it onto the screen. "This is the data log from the time of the failure. You can see that instability began immediately after the configuration change Ethan approved. I issued a risk alert before deployment, but there was no response." I paused, looking straight at him. "I'm not here to assign blame, but to prevent another failure, someone who truly understands this system from the inside must be in charge of it." The CFO spoke up, voice matter of fact. "If the outage had lasted 12 more hours, Northgrid would have canceled the contract. We've already lost nearly 20% of our stock value in 2 days." Linda's gaze moved between us. "I told the board Aurora would be restored within 48 hours. Rachel delivered. Now we decide what comes next." The air tightened. My palms felt cold against the table. Linda continued, "I'm assigning Rachel full technical authority over Aurora for 60 days, until the next board review." Ethan shot to his feet. "She doesn't have executive management experience. You're putting the company's core systems in one person's hands." Linda lifted her head, calm and unshaken. "The company's been in her hands for 6 years, Ethan. You've been here for 2 months." The words hit like a clean strike. Ethan froze, speechless. I didn't look at him. I just said quietly, "I'll need a support team. Ben Alvarez. And 2 data operations engineers. And I'll need direct access to the client systems for response coordination." Linda nodded. "Do whatever you need to keep Aurora stable." Ethan started to speak, but Linda was already on her feet. Meeting adjourned. Afterward, I didn't return to my desk right away. I went down to the engineering floor. The once familiar room now felt like a battlefield left standing after the smoke cleared. The younger engineers looked at me differently, not as a colleague anymore, but as the person who had just stripped power from their superior. I didn't blame them. Power, even when earned, always unsettles people. By afternoon, Ben found me. Linda approved? I nodded. Do you know what Ethan's doing? I asked. He's meeting privately with the mid level managers. Word is, he's forming an independent audit group to monitor your process. I smiled faintly. Let him. The more eyes on it, the clearer they'll see who's really running this system. We worked late into the night. Ben handled backups while I combed through every module, isolating weak points in the structure. I didn't want Aurora just restored. I wanted it stronger, immune to interference by anyone who didn't understand its pulse. Near 2 in the morning, I stood and stretched, watching the steady green lights flicker across the server racks. Aurora was fully stable. I saved the final report and sent it directly to Linda. The next day, the internal announcement went out. Aurora system restored to 100% efficiency. No new errors detected. The message appeared on every monitor across the engineering floor. People clapped. I stayed seated, watching the words on the screen and thinking of my father's voice. The system had proven itself. As I prepared to leave, Linda called me into her office. She stood by the window, the city glowing beneath her. You know, she said slowly, yesterday I told the board that if Aurora came back, the person who kept it alive would no longer be buried on an engineering roster. You deserve recognition. I stayed quiet, just nodded. Linda turned, her gaze sharp but warm. As for Ethan, he'll remain as an advisor during the transition. I'm avoiding open conflict, for now. I understood. The war wasn't over, but the balance had shifted. When I stepped out, I saw Ethan down the hall, phone pressed to his ear. His eyes met mine, cold, hard, metallic. He wouldn't stop. I knew that. But this time, I had tools, a team, and the full trust of the system behind me. I walked past him without turning back, a quiet clarity spreading through me. Aurora hadn't just been saved, it was ready to become my weapon. The rumors started just a few days after the meeting. I never found out who began them, but somehow the story that I had deliberately caused the outage to seize control of Aurora spread through the company faster than logic could explain. In the cafe downstairs, I overheard a pair of employees whisper that the whole crisis had been staged to take Ethan down. In the engineer's break room, someone claimed I had modified the source code to trigger a temporary failure, then swooped in at the perfect moment to save the system. None of it was true, but I didn't bother defending myself. At Hawthorne Dynamics, silence often carried more weight than explanations ever could. Ethan knew how to use rumors. He started showing up more often in internal meetings, speaking in that calm, deep voice of his, the kind people listen to when they think they're hearing wisdom. He played the part of a man misunderstood, planting quiet doubts with every glance, every half smile. Sometimes all it took was a small shrug from him to make others believe he knew something I didn't. I was never good at that game, and he knew it. One afternoon, HR called me in. The HR office on the 18th floor always felt too quiet, too soft compared to the humming tension of the engineering levels. Evelyn, the HR director, greeted me with a practiced smile. Rachel, we just need to clarify a few details about the Aurora incident, she said, her tone sounding more like a survey than an inquiry. I sat upright, hands resting calmly on my lap. Of course, I'm happy to answer. Evelyn asked about the configuration changes before the failure, the approval process, and who had access during that window. I responded succinctly, handing her a printed copy of the technical logs I had prepared. Every entry was timestamped, verified, and digitally signed by Ethan. When she reached that section, her eyes slowed. You kept everything? I nodded. I make a habit of recording every change, no matter how small. Aurora doesn't forgive mistakes. She closed the file gently and smiled again, the polite kind of smile that signaled an interview was over. I appreciate your thoroughness. We'll review this closely. Thank you for your cooperation. I rose, shook her hand, and stepped out. Ethan was walking toward me from the hall. His eyes flicked to mine and paused for a second. They called you in? He asked quietly, just loud enough for others nearby to hear. I replied, just like they'll call you. Then I walked past him, hearing the deliberate rhythm of his footsteps fade behind me. That night, Ben stopped by my office. He placed a color printout on my desk, an anonymous leak of an internal email someone had sent to me. In it, Ethan had written to a circle of mid-level managers, implying that some of Rachel Pierce's actions during the Aurora crisis raised ethical concerns. Nothing specific, but enough to seed suspicion. I read it, folded the page, and said, "We're not responding." Ben stared. At me. "You're going to stay quiet forever?" I smiled faintly. "I only need to speak once, and I'll know when." The next morning, Linda summoned both Ethan and me to meet with the executive board. The room was fuller than usual. Along with Linda and the CFO, two board members attended remotely. I presented a brief summary of the Aurora recovery process, backed by detailed logs and documentation. When I reached the section about the configuration changes, I paused and projected a screenshot of the command authorization bearing Ethan's signature. The room went still. Linda turned to him. "Do you confirm this is your digital signature?" Ethan tried to keep his composure. "I signed it, yes, but based on recommendations from the technical team." I answered calmly. "No one on my team proposed that change. I have the meeting recording and the confirmation email." I pressed a key and a short audio clip played. Ethan's voice was unmistakable. "Go ahead. I want results faster." When the clip ended, silence filled the room. Linda closed her eyes briefly, then said, "We'll stop here. I'll handle this internally." The meeting ended quickly. Ethan left first without looking at anyone. Linda called me back as the others dispersed. Her voice was low, steady. "I won't make this public. We don't need another scandal. But I'll restrict Ethan's access to Aurora. From now on, he'll serve as an advisor on another project." I nodded. "Thank you. I'm not looking for a victory. I just want transparency." That evening, I stayed late in the office. Outside, the wind brushed against the glass, carrying the faint scent of early snow over Denver. I opened Aurora and watched the data streams flow steady and strong again. Like a body recovered after a fever, Ben texted, "They say Ethan's access has been revoked." I replied, "I know." Then I leaned back, closed my eyes, and listened to the quiet hum of the servers. No triumph, no relief, just a stillness so deep I could hear my heartbeat blend with the rhythm of the machines. Tomorrow, the rumors would die. But I knew Ethan wouldn't. A man like him didn't know how to lose quietly, and as long as he stayed, I had to be ready for the next storm. After Ethan was stripped of his access, the atmosphere inside Hawthorne Dynamics changed noticeably. People moved with a softer rhythm, and the clatter of keyboards in the engineering room no longer carried that sharp edge of tension. But I knew better. This quiet was only temporary. In complex systems like Hawthorne Dynamics, the new order is always the most fragile kind. I began rebuilding Aurora's entire operational framework. The Aurora Transparency Project, an idea I'd once scribbled down during countless sleepless nights, was now fully approved by Linda. Its goal was simple but audacious. Every data input, every change, every line of technical contribution would be tracked, recorded, and publicly traceable, untouchable by manipulation. I wanted to end the old culture where people fought to put their names on someone else's work. The first meeting to launch the project had a strange energy. Some faces looked eager, others cautious. I stood before the main screen and spoke plainly. From now on, every line of code and every modification will carry the name of the person who made it. No shared signatures, no anonymous credits. Everything will have a traceable origin. And when someone does good work, their name will appear in the performance reports. No more taking credit for what isn't yours. Ben, seated closest to me, gave me a small, proud look. "You're doing what Ethan never dared to," he said quietly. "He didn't believe transparency could create power," I replied. "I do." The program went live within 2 weeks, and the results came faster than I expected. Teams that had once been silent began sharing new ideas with confidence. A young engineer, someone almost invisible before, proposed a memory optimization that cut storage costs by 10%. I brought him directly into the executive meeting so he could present it himself. Changes like that began rippling through the company, shifting the atmosphere from hesitant to engaged. I realized then that real power doesn't come from holding secrets, it comes from turning transparency into momentum. Aurora Transparency wasn't just a technical project, it was a moral test for the entire system. And maybe that was why I started noticing the way people were looking at me, curious, cautious, measuring. Late one afternoon, as I was reviewing performance reports, Linda walked in. She rested a hand on the back of my chair, her voice low. Rachel, you should know. Ethan's still in touch with some of his old managers. I don't know what he's planning, but be careful. I looked up and caught the genuine concern in her eyes. He doesn't have access anymore, Linda. If he tries to interfere, the system will flag it. She nodded, but didn't leave yet. I'm not worried about him breaking in. I'm worried about him telling a different story. You know how it is. Sometimes people believe words over data. I understood what she meant, but answered softly, if he wants to tell a story, I'll let Aurora tell the part he leaves out. That night, I stayed late. The hallways were empty, filled only with the low hum of servers. I opened Aurora's monitoring interface and watched the green code streaming steadily against the black background. The system was balanced, precise, fair. The kind of fairness I never had when I was told I wasn't ready for promotion. Ben texted. Someone saw Ethan in the lobby this afternoon. Looks like he's not planning to leave anytime soon. I read the message, then set my phone down. I wasn't afraid. I just understood, more clearly than ever, that his silence wasn't retreat. It was preparation. I turned toward the window. The Denver skyline shimmered beneath the mountains, lights stretching into the distance. In the reflection, my face looked different, not tired anymore, just focused. I knew the game wasn't over. But next time, if Ethan wanted to fight with stories, I'd let the system speak for itself. And when it did, Aurora wouldn't just prove who was right, it would expose how power had always operated in the dark. I saw Ethan again 2 weeks after he was suspended. It was late in the afternoon, and the parking lot behind the building was nearly empty. The September sky hung low and gray, heavy with clouds, and the wind carried a damp chill from the Platte River that slid between the steel columns. I was heading straight for my car when I heard that familiar voice behind me. Busy as always, huh? Leaving this late? Ethan was leaning against a black sedan, sleeves rolled up, looking calmer than I expected. Not like a man who'd lost his position, but someone who believed the game wasn't over. I stopped, keeping a careful distance. I thought you'd left Denver, he smiled. I still have a contract, and I'm not the kind of man who leaves the board before the match is done. His tone was smooth, deliberate, like he was inviting me back into a game I had already finished playing. I was silent for a few seconds, then said, if that board is Aurora, you don't need to come back. It's running perfectly. Ah, I know. Everyone's calling you the savior now, aren't they? He said, a flicker of irony in his eyes. But have you ever thought that the system isn't yours anymore? It's company property. You're just the caretaker. The words cut through the air like a pin through glass. I looked him straight in the eye. I never thought Aurora belonged to me, but I know exactly who tried to turn it into a weapon to prove his own power. Ethan stepped closer, his gaze sharp, clear, and unsettlingly calm. You still don't get it. In a place like this, being right doesn't matter. Controlling the story does. You've taken the spotlight, but you won't hold it forever. Maybe, I said evenly. But the difference is, I don't need the spotlight to survive. He gave a faint smile, tilting his head. I've filed a complaint with the Boston headquarters. They'll be auditing your Aurora transparency rollout, your access logs, your data changes, everything. I just hope you kept things clean. I didn't flinch. That's why you're still here, isn't it? He nodded. Someone has to remind them that no one rewrites the system without permission. His arms crossed. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to destroy you. I just want to prove you're no different from me. You want power too. I met his eyes, my voice low and cold. The difference is, I use power to fix the system, not to control people. You're mistaken if you think I did all this just to win. He paused, then shrugged lightly. We'll see who understands how this game really works. I may have lost one round, but you'll soon realize that winning a meeting doesn't mean you're safe. If you believe that, I said, then you still haven't learned anything from Aurora. It responds to data, not to stories. Ethan's smile was thin, metallic. Then let's see which story the data tells. He turned, got into his car, and the engine roared to life, breaking the silence around us. I stood there for a moment, wind, whipping through my hair, cold and biting. His threat wasn't empty. In a place like Hawthorne Dynamics, everything could shift with a single email, sent to the right person at the right moment. When I returned upstairs, Linda was standing by the window in the empty conference room. She turned as I entered. "He came to see you?" I nodded. "He said he's filing a complaint with Boston." Linda exhaled slowly. "I figured as much. I heard about it this morning. Don't worry, Rachel. They'll have to go by evidence, and Aurora itself is the best evidence we have." I smiled faintly. He still believes power decides who's right. "And you're about to show them," Linda said. "That truth speaks louder than any voice." As I left the room, the hallway lights reflected off the polished floor beneath my steps. I thought about Ethan and his words. He was right about one thing. The game wasn't over. But this time, I wasn't on defense anymore. If he wanted to drag the story into the light, I'd let that same light expose everything. I stopped at the glass door of the engineering lab and looked inside. Aurora pulsed quietly, hundreds of indicator lights blinking in a steady rhythm like a heartbeat. I whispered, "We're going to have to prove it again." In the reflection on the glass, I saw myself, not the woman who'd once been overlooked, but someone ready for the final round. It was Monday morning, and I arrived on the 34th floor earlier than usual. The board of directors had called a special meeting to evaluate the results of Aurora Transparency and review a proposal to restructure the engineering division. The conference room was bright, its glass walls overlooking the snow-dusted ridges of the Rockies. The air carried a strange kind of quiet. Not cold, not tense, just expectant. Like everyone was waiting for something to shift. Linda sat at the head of the table and gave me a brief nod as I entered. "Are you ready, Rachel?" I answered simply, "Always." The board members filed in one by one, most of them people I had only seen in internal emails before now. When the door closed, Linda began, her tone measured. "Today we'll be reviewing the proposal to expand Aurora Transparency company-wide and discussing the new leadership structure for the technical division." She looked at me. "Rachel, you may begin." I stood and opened the first slide. The data lit up the screen. Performance up 31%, system errors down nearly 40, and over 80% of employees reporting improved trust and collaboration since the transparency protocol had launched. I spoke clearly, evenly. Aurora Transparency isn't just a technical framework. It's a way for people to see their own value within the system they sustain. When data is honest, people become honest too. One of the board members, an older man with silver hair, leaned back in his chair, smiling faintly. "Impressive. Do you believe this model could extend beyond the engineering department?" I nodded. "I do. Transparency is the most sustainable architecture for trust." He considered that for a moment. Then Linda continued, "I propose promoting Rachel Pierce to Vice President of Systems Engineering, overseeing all energy and AI projects." The room went still for a few seconds. Then glances began to shift. One nod followed another. The silver-haired man raised his hand. "I agree." More voices followed. Linda tapped her pen lightly against the table. "Approved. Effective next month." She looked at me, her voice softer than usual. "Congratulations, Rachel." I sat down. I didn't smile. A cold pulse ran through me. There was something in Linda's eyes that made it impossible to feel entirely safe. 3 days later, an email arrived in the board's inbox from Boston headquarters. Sender, Ethan Cole. The message was more than 20 pages long, a formal complaint accusing me of unauthorized modifications to the system's security protocols, of accessing client data without clearance, of using Aurora Transparency to consolidate personal power. The email went straight to Linda. My copy arrived close to midnight. I read every word. At the end, he'd written, "A system built on transparency cannot be run by someone who uses it to conceal their own control." I didn't feel anger, only a slow, cold clarity spreading through my chest. It was his final move, a strike made not with data, but with narrative, and I already knew how I'd respond. The next morning, Linda called me into her office. She placed a printed copy of Ethan's email on the table. I've read it. The Boston board wants a full audit of Aurora transparency. They're holding an emergency review this afternoon. Are you ready? I nodded. If they want the truth, I'll show them exactly what it looks like. The meeting took place online. Ethan appeared on the screen wearing a dark suit, expression calm, voice controlled. He began with a short speech about data ethics and the dangers of unchecked technical authority. He sounded composed, polished, like a man saving the company from itself. When he finished, Linda gestured toward me. I didn't use slides. I simply opened Aurora Transparency and shared the live interface for everyone to see. Gentlemen, I said, every accusation of manipulation can be verified here. Aurora records all activity, unalterable, permanent, time-stamped. I typed a few commands. Lines of data scrolled across the screen. Digital signatures, access logs, authorization records. Then I opened a file labeled ETN04, dated 6 months earlier. This was the last time Mr. Ethan Cole modified the storage model without approval. And here, another command. This is the log showing he exported internal data to an external drive 2 weeks after his suspension. The room went silent. Ethan stood motionless on the screen, color drained from his face. I continued, I'm not presenting this out of vengeance. I just want to show that Aurora doesn't lie. It doesn't need defenders. It only needs to be run with integrity. Linda nodded once. The silver-haired board member spoke, his tone final. We have sufficient evidence. Thank you, Ms. Pierce. I move to terminate Mr. Cole's contract immediately and forward the security breach to legal. The screen went dark. The meeting ended. Linda looked at me. You just silenced the Boston board with their own data. Not their data, I said quietly. The data of truth. She smiled faintly, a trace of pride in her eyes. That line belongs on your office door, Vice President. That afternoon, I stood alone in the engineering bay. Aurora pulsed steadily, its blue indicators reflecting against the glass walls like a living heartbeat. Outside, the rain had begun, thin, silvery streaks veiling the Denver skyline. I thought of Ethan, not with anger, but with a cold understanding. Some people exist only to remind us that if a system isn't built right, it will consume even those who created it. I opened the system log and typed a single new line. Justice doesn't come from accusations, but from evidence that speaks for itself. When I shut down the screen, my reflection lingered in the glow of Aurora. Calm, focused, unafraid. The anger was gone, the fear, too. Only one simple truth remained. I hadn't just saved a system. I had rewritten how people perceive the truth itself. That night, I was the last to leave the building. The glass walls mirrored the soft light still glowing on the engineering floor, like the neural pathways of a living organism. I knew I didn't have to prove anything anymore. This time, Aurora had spoken. 3 months after the meeting in Boston, the atmosphere inside Hawthorne Dynamics was completely different. The once silent hallways now buzzed with the sound of keyboards and lively discussions. Aurora Transparency was no longer a pilot project. It had become the backbone of the company's entire operational structure. Subsidiaries from Texas to New York were now required to implement it exactly as my team and I had designed. Every morning, I still arrived earlier than everyone else, walking through the engineering floor, now fully open to employees at all levels. There were no longer restricted zones reserved for executives. In one corner, a group of young engineers was testing a new patch for Aurora. On the other side, the HR team was using the system to analyze productivity and suggest bonuses through transparent metrics. Everything ran smoothly, evenly, naturally, as if fairness had never been a luxury. I realized this calm was not the same silence we used to know. Back then, silence was fear. Now it was focused. And that, finally, was the kind of peace I had always wanted. Linda still carried her composed demeanor, but there was something different in her eyes whenever she looked at me. She wasn't just a superior anymore, but an ally, someone who understood the battlefield we'd crossed together. One afternoon, as we stood in front of the system's performance dashboard, she asked quietly, You know what the most interesting thing about all this is? I looked at her. What? She smiled. Aurora runs best when no one's trying to prove they're right. Maybe the company's the same way. Maybe people too, I said. At the end of that month, I launched my next project, codename Lumen. It wasn't just an expansion of Aurora, it was its evolution. If Aurora had given transparency to people, Lumen would give awareness to data, teaching AI systems to recognize bias and warn when humans tried to misuse them. At the kickoff meeting, I told my team, we made technology capable of seeing human behavior. Now it's time to make it understand what's right. Everyone exchanged glances, and Ben, half joked, half serious, you're teaching machines ethics now? I nodded. Yes. Because if we don't, there'll always be another Ethan trying to control it. The room chuckled softly, but no one disagreed. Everyone understood exactly what I meant. One late evening, I received an email from an international data ethics organization inviting me to be the keynote speaker at their annual conference in Seattle. The topic, the human code, how transparency rewrites power. I accepted, not realizing until the guest list arrived weeks later that one familiar name would be there, Ethan Cole. The conference was held in a glass tower overlooking Elliott Bay. The sea wind was strong, and the distant horns of cargo ships echoed through the city. As I entered the hall, faces from across the tech world turned toward me, their expressions a mix of curiosity and respect. I spoke about trust, about how data could be a vessel for ethics rather than control. The speech ended with long applause. When the lights dimmed, I saw him, standing at the back of the room in a gray shirt, no speaker badge. After the session, he walked up to me. His face was thinner, lines carved deeper around his eyes. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something heavier, recognition, maybe regret. He spoke quietly. I saw your presentation. Aurora. It's impressive. I used to think you just wanted to win, I said. I only wanted people to see that the truth doesn't need anyone to defend it. He nodded. You're right. Maybe I feared transparency because I knew it would see through me. There was a long pause between us. Then he said, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want to thank you for keeping things clean. If you hadn't, I might have destroyed more than I realized. I looked at him. I didn't keep things clean, Ethan. Aurora did. I just taught it where to look. He smiled faintly, a tired, remorseful smile. And maybe you taught me too. We shook hands. There was no bitterness left, only the quiet understanding that both of us had learned something from the wreckage we'd made. When I returned to Denver, night had already fallen. The city glimmered under a thin veil of mist. I went back to my office, opened the system log, and typed a few lines. I used to think justice meant making the guilty pay. Now I understand it means ensuring the next innocent doesn't have to. I saved the file and tagged it, archived forever. I stood up and walked through the operations floor, where Aurora was still running in the background. The indicator lights on the control board shifted into energy saving mode, not because of an error, but because the system had learned to balance itself. Every time I looked at those lights, I felt like I was watching a living organism, its scars rebuilt into something stronger. The next morning, I arrived early again. Dawn stretched over the mountains, and the glass facade of Hawthorne reflected that light. So pure, it was hard to believe this place had once been a battleground of deceit and power. I stepped outside, ready to leave, when I heard someone call out, Vice President Pierce, you forgot your phone. A young engineer ran up, holding out the device I'd left on the meeting table. I smiled at him. Keep it. I'll be back later. The system's yours now. As I walked away, the early wind brushed through my hair. From the upper floors, the soft blue glow of Aurora shimmered down, merging with the pale morning sky. I knew tomorrow would bring new mistakes, new people hungry for control, but the system had been rewritten to defend itself with truth. As I crossed the street, the clock tower chimed in the distance. I thought about all the years I'd been overlooked, the morning I'd been denied that promotion, the moment I chose silence over rage. If I could go back, I wouldn't change a thing. Because sometimes, to change a system, you don't have to break it, you just have to teach it to see itself. And once it does, justice stops being a dream. It becomes the way the world runs. I looked up at the building one last time. The blue lights of Aurora reflected in the glass, blending with the gold of the rising sun. The two colors merged as one, an unspoken truth that when technology and integrity align, they can create a light that never fades.